Welcome back. In this video, I'll be finishing up Learning Objective 5.2 and then moving on to Learning Objective 5.3 for Chapter 5 for PSY 235 Social Psychology. We left off the discussion talking about the misattribution of arousal and, by extension, relabeling our arousal experiences with emotion. Now we're going to shift our focus in our study of the self to types of motivation and trying to explore the way in which there's an intersection between self-perception and how we interpret why we want to do what we're doing. There are a couple of broad categories of motivation. On the one hand, you have intrinsic motivation, which is the desire to do a thing simply because we enjoy doing it and find it fun, not because we're being externally motivated. So we aren't being given rewards or pressures. We're not doing it to please others. We're doing it simply because we enjoy it. In contrast, you have external motivation. And external motivation is really defined as engaging in an activity because of what you get from it. So you get payment, or you get affection from other people, or other kinds of rewards, or you're doing it to avoid punishment or negative outcomes. Those are extrinsic, external motivators. When you think about these differences, why we do what we do, basically on the intrinsic side, you do things because of enjoyment, because it gives you a sense of purpose, it allows you to grow, you're passionate about it, it feeds your curiosity, it allows you to express who you are, and basically it's just fun. On the extrinsic side, it's the outcome that really matters. So if you're working hard, it's to get promotions, pay raises, benefits, maybe working hard in school so that you can jump the next hoop and get a really good paying job. Those are all extrinsic motivators. Now, very few of the things that humans do are purely intrinsically motivated and purely extrinsically motivated. There's a lot of things that I enjoy doing just for the sake of doing them, but they also have extrinsic consequences. So, I love teaching. I really like it, but I also enjoy getting paid. So, work for me is both intrinsically and extrinsically motivating. So I don't want you to think that you have to kind of divide your life up into the things that intrinsically motivated you versus the extrinsic. And neither one of them is inherently good or bad. At the same time, we need to understand, how do we keep people intrinsically motivated and don't take away their passion for doing things that they enjoy? And what we find, and this comes from a lot of behavioral research, is that can be a tricky balance. So let's look at research showing what's called the over-justification effect.
What do you enjoy doing in your free time? Playing tennis, painting, origami? You love doing these things. And if you get paid for them, wouldn't that be even better? Right? Being paid to do what you love may seem like a good deal, but you may end up enjoying that activity less and less. External rewards like money or awards reduce a person's intrinsic motivation to do something they already enjoy. This is called the over-justification effect. When you enjoy an activity like a game of tennis or painting, you do it because of intrinsic motivations. The activity itself is the reward. You do it simply because you want to. But when money enters the picture, you start doing the activity for the money. In 1973, the over-justification effect was tested by a trio, Mark Lepper, Daniel Green, and Richard Nisbet. Here is what they did. They identified a group of children who enjoyed drawing and divided them into 3 groups. They They told the first group beforehand that they would get a glittery certificate if they spent their playtime drawing. They told the second group nothing beforehand, but they were surprised with a glittery certificate as well. The last group was not told anything and did not get a certificate if they drew. For 3 days, they observed the children and handed out the rewards. 2 weeks later, they returned to the same group of children to observe them doing their playtime again. This time, there were no rewards for everyone. How would these children choose to spend their playtime? Remember, before the experiment was conducted, they enjoyed drawing and doing their playtime. For the second group with a surprise reward and the last group with no reward, they continued to gravitate towards drawing. But for the first group, the group that was promised a reward for drawing and doing their playtime, they spent less time drawing and displayed less interest in drawing. So, the over-justification effect was proven. But what does this mean for us? Should we reject every monetary reward that comes to steal our joy? Well, not really. Another group of psychologists, David Rosenfield, Robert Folger, and Harold Edelman, conducted a study that suggested that it's perfectly fine to give and receive rewards, as long as there is a good reason to. If a person is given rewards based on how well they do the task, they will want to do the task again and even try to do better the next time. But if a person is rewarded just because they simply finish the task, they will not be motivated to do the task next time. So, here's a great tip for employers. Reward competence, and you'll get people to work harder and better. Reward completion, and you'll get people who will eventually slack off.
So what you see there is an explanation with a little bit of silliness included about how we can set up situations that can either enhance intrinsic motivation or can shift us to perceiving that extrinsic motivators are more powerful. So we have to really think about the impacts of the context on the effect of let me start over. We have to think about the effects of rewards in terms of the cognitions that people have about those rewards in context. And people will put this in the context of their self-concept, and then it will affect their motivation to perform behaviors in the future. And what people are really doing here is they're making attributions. So if you go back to a previous chapter where we talked about attribution theory, motivation really has a lot to do with the inferences you make about what is really causing your behavior in the first place. So with the kids in that classic study described on the previous slide, you had the manipulation in the experiment was really designed to shift their attention to the reward, to the external motivator. And then what happened as a result was, what's the most obvious motivator in the situation where the kids are told, you're going to get a certificate for painting or drawing, and the second group gets surprised with the certificate versus the control group that gets nothing. And what they wanted to know was, if we make an obvious external reward super obvious, will that shift the person's self-focus away from their intrinsic love of the activity and toward the external reward? Some of you may remember, I know my kids had this when they were in elementary school, but Pizza Hut, the restaurant, used to offer, if you did reading, you could get a personal pan pizza. And my kids got really excited about this because pizza. And the problem with it, though, was that it was often more about just getting the pizza than actually loving the reading. And what was found in some research on the very same topic was just saying, read stuff and I'll give you a pizza, often backfired. Because if they got kids reading more in exchange for pizza, once the pizza promo was over, their reading actually went down. So once that very obvious reward is stripped away, their actual enjoyment of the reading behavior went into the basement, and was sometimes challenging to recover without a new reward system. So the danger of simple reward programs like the Pizza Hut reading program is that people start thinking that the only reason they're doing the behavior is because of the reward. And that's a real dangerous thing in terms of motivation, because we want people to happily engage in behaviors that they enjoy. And layering on a reward on top of that that's really salient and obvious can lead to that over-justification effect. Because what you're really doing is you are supplying people with a very easy to articulate reason for why they're engaging in the behavior in the first place. So sometimes kids, when they're asked, why are you reading? Because I want my pizza. And that becomes very obvious. And it's harder to articulate why you're reading just because you like it. It's like the guy with the beer can trying to explain why he loves his girlfriend. He's having trouble finding words to express it. So the pizza becomes a much more obvious reason. Now, if you take that reward away, that's when the over-justification effect occurs. Why is it called over-justification? It's because you've taken a behavior that was already intrinsically motivated, and then you're slapping a reward on top of it. So you take a behavior like reading that kids were already doing and putting a reward on top, and that can actually deflate their motivation. Now, you might ask, what about the kids who weren't reading at all? Same goes. If you ask them, why weren't you reading in the past? I don't like it. Why are you reading now? Pizza. And their behavior is going to go back to baseline when the pizza is removed. For the kids who loved reading before, the over-justification effect can actually temporarily tank their interest. It'll recover later, but it will have that sort of boomerang effect on them. So what do we need to do to preserve intrinsic interest? And the video touched on this quite a bit. What you have to do is avoid over-justification when you're using a reward system to keep people motivated. Rewards are going to undermine interest if that interest was initially very high, and the type of reward matters to people. If it's a big reward, it's a really big reward, that tends to be distracting and make over-justification more likely. If the reward is just, hey, nice job, and it's little, it's less distracting, and intrinsic interest may be preserved. So if you need to be aware, if intrinsic interest is already super high, you don't want to make big, obvious, splashy rewards on top of that, because that can shift people's explanations toward the external and away from their intrinsic desire. Sometimes, young athletes will kind of fall into this if they're given like super concrete rewards for engaging in practice. They may find that their motivational set, their mindset about motivation, will start shifting to the reward structure that they're getting and away from the love of the sport. So coaches, really gifted coaches are very careful about this. They may not use the theory, but they're really good at applying it. They know that they need to preserve intrinsic desire to keep them playing, without trying to create elaborate praise systems, because those can actually backfire. Another way of preserving interest is to use performance standards. Now, this may sound kind of wicked on the surface, and if it's done in a really false, sort of pretentious way, it can be icky. Yes, that's an empirical term. But basically, if you are saying even the simplest thing, and I think Pizza Hut did this for a while, I'd have to fact check it, but I seem to remember that some teachers with the reading program. They were like, you need to read this many books at this level in order to get the reward. And part of the reward that they also supplied, not just the Pizza Hut voucher, but they also gave them more access to more books as well. That kind of performance contingent system where they had to read a certain number of books and they had to be at a certain level, and it was a reading level that was somewhat challenging, then they tend to continue to do better and to state that they liked it. If you have task contingent rewards, which means that you are simply saying, if you do it, I will give you the reward. So what my kids noticed about some of their classmates was, if they set the standard, complete this pile of stuff and you'll get your pizza, they would do it quickly and not well. So they may have been turning the pages of the book, but not reading deeply. So with performance contingent, and I had a teacher in like 4th grade who did this. I was really annoyed with him at the time. He wanted us to read at a slightly higher level than we had been reading previously. And he wanted us to consume books. So he would, every time we finished a book, we had to come up to him and he would ask us some questions. And if we answered the questions accurately, then we got the reward. And the reward was being able to go into his he had this box of ridiculous little toys, and we could pick one out at random. But he had a performance standard, and students got really competitive with each other about passing his little tests. And what it did was make us really intent on reading carefully and feeling proud of the fact that we could answer his questions. That preserved intrinsic interest. In contrast, if he had just said, if you read 5 books, I don't care how carefully you read them, you just need to read 5 books, and you can get in the box and get a toy, then that would tend to lead to very surface reading and not high quality reading. And once you take the rewards away, the level of reading would go back to baseline. Performance contingent rewards are those that are based on how well we do the task, and those do tend to preserve intrinsic interests. Now, another aspect of motivation that's been studied a little bit more recently than some of the studies I've been describing in this section it's the idea of impart a cultural set of beliefs about mindsets and motivation. Some cultures and some people within cultures tend to have a fixed mindset, and other people tend to have a growth mindset. And some cultures tend to lean in the direction of fixed. Other cultures tend to lean in the direction of growth. And some individuals, based on how they were raised and what their experiences were, they may have a more fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. So what do we mean by these two things? A fixed mindset is basically the idea that in some ability area, you have a set amount of ability and you can't change it. Period. With a growth mindset, on the other hand, is the perception that you have the ability to change how well you do over time, that you can cultivate your capacity and you can grow. So, for example, in comparing fixed and growth, I have always seen myself as being pathetically horrible at math. My son-in-law and my daughter were over this weekend to help me build a ramp for my elderly dog who's having trouble walking now that she's very old. And my son-in-law is pretty gifted with math, and he starts doing elaborate, like, trigonometry-based formulas. And I look at the paper that he's mapping these things out on, and I'm like, I'm having math trauma right now because I suck at math. That is a fixed mindset. And in contrast, I have lots of friends, acquaintances who they had a very different approach to math. They were like, it's a skill. I can learn the skill. Now, for myself, like my approach to learning how to ride horses when I was a kid was very growth oriented. Like, I'm not very good at it right now, but I'm going to learn and I'm going to keep working really hard. I'm going to use a lot of motivation and I'm going to get better. That's a growth mindset, that you will become better at a skill over time with effort. A fixed mindset says, I was born with a certain capacity and I cannot change that capacity. My attitudes about my ability to do math are very fixed. I believe I'm bad at it. I don't even try to balance a checkbook. I just say, I can't do it. Somebody else needs to do it for me. It's a good thing we have calculators and statistic packages, because I tend to think I just can't do that kind of thing. Now we'll shift gears entirely to another theory that affects how we understand ourselves. Social comparison, and this is a theory that has connections, has sort of fingers in psychology as well as sociology. The idea is that we learn about ourselves in the context of other people. And particularly when we're looking at skills and abilities, we tend to look at the skills and abilities of others. Sometimes we want an aspirant. So when I was a track athlete in high school, I was a hurdler. And my freshman year, I had a role model. Her name was Molly, and she was an amazing athlete. I mean, state champion, all kinds of stuff. And I wanted to learn to hurdle like her. And so I would upwardly compare myself to her and her abilities. Now, there were other people who I would look at and say, yeah, I'm better than them. And that makes me feel okay. So we do upward comparisons, so we can compare ourselves to people who are better than us, and we can compare ourselves to people who are worse than us at a particular skill. So when are we going to engage in social comparison? Typically when there isn't a solid objective standard that we can compare ourselves to. Now, my track and field example, I could look at time as the only metric, but I was really interested in form, in just the beauty of running and things like that. And I would look at the way my role model moved and think, I need to be more like that, and not like this other person who was crashing into every hurdle. So when you don't have solid standards and you're really just aspiring, that's when you're most likely to engage in social comparison. It's especially when you're new at something. So in this situation, I was brand new to learning how to run hurdles. I didn't know what my own personal standard was, anything like that. So I was really comparing my own abilities to someone else's in order to determine whether or not I was good at it. It also can happen if you're uncertain about yourself in a particular area. When I was running track my freshman year, I was really uncertain about whether I was going to be seen as good enough, if I was going to be able to do these skills at a high enough level to compete, and so on. That uncertainty often prompts us pretty immediately to do social comparisons. Now, as I mentioned before, we often will do upward comparisons. So if we want to become better, so if our motivational goal is to improve, we'll tend to make upward social comparisons. If our goal is something different, we may make downward comparisons, particularly if our goal is to make ourselves feel better. So let's say that I run in a track meet and I get second, and it's actually my role model who gets first. I might be a little disappointed, but it's my role model who beat me. I mean, upward social comparison says that is your goal. Be as good as that person. And that's going to feel fine. What if, though, I end up fourth? Now, to preserve my self-esteem, I may feel better if I compare myself to the people who got fifth and sixth, or especially to the kid who fell down at the start. That'll make me feel better. Isn't that mean? But it's true. So if we want to really, you have to think about it in terms of how it makes you feel. So if we are aspiring, if we are really motivated to improve, we'll tend to make upward comparisons. If, however, we're feeling threatened, if we feel like our self-esteem is being threatened, we may tend to go downward and say, yeah, but I'm better than that person. Thank goodness, right? Okay, so that concludes Learning Objective 5.2. Now we're going to switch over to Learning Objective 5.3, which is really focused on self-control. And you know, for anyone who's ever tried to change their own habits and behaviors, the real issue that you ran into was self-control. So whether it's you're trying to exercise more or eat differently or change how you behave in response to certain people, you're trying to change habits. And self-control is a big part of that entire process. So what do we mean by self-control? Then this really gets at this idea of having executive function controls. An educator, I think it was one of my kids' teachers, had talked about executive functions like this. It's the hands on the wheel and the feet on the pedals. How well are you able to turn the wheel and press on the brakes and press on the gas to keep yourself moving in the right direction? Those are executive functions of the self. It involves the ability to override emotions, to control behavior, and to really kind of focus in on motivational factors and goals that you have for yourself. So self-control basically is the ability to put the brakes on immediate desires so that you can reach longer-term goals that you have. So this teacher's metaphor about, you know, your goal is way off in the distance. It's several exits down the highway. How do you control immediate desires like, I really want some more coffee, or I really want McDonald's French fries? And there are signs along the side of the road screaming your name, saying, come get coffee, come get fries. And you have the ability instead to take a hold of the wheel, keep your foot off the brake, keep your foot on the gas, and keep moving toward the exit you are supposed to turn off of, instead of going for the immediate desire. So the self, in terms of its executive functions, is really that overarching thing that helps us regulate what we do, helps us make good choices, and takes us in the direction of future plans, often that are distant in time. Now, lots of people struggle with self-control. So what doesn't work when you're struggling with self-control? It doesn't help to try not thinking about something. It's like that old adage of don't think about the bear, and then suddenly you can't stop thinking about the bear, or something like that. One of my kids, when they were little, they had seen a tiny little spider on the ceiling, and they come into our room, wake us up, and they're like, there's a spider in my room, you have to kill it. And we were tired, and we were like, just don't think about the spider. Do you think the kid could stop thinking about the spider? No, she could not. So we had to go in and take care of the spider. It doesn't help to just stop thinking about something, because you can't. It also doesn't help to just think about the long-term goal more. That often can become overwhelming. So like if you are, you know what your long-term goal is, but you're feeling like you would prefer to do something else in the moment that's very tempting, saying to yourself, keep your eyes on the prize, keep your eyes on the prize. Even if you recite it like a mantra, it just makes the thing that you're trying to avoid, the tempting thing, even more tempting. So what actually helps? First, making the goal, the big goal, break it down so that you have what your authors call specific implementation intentions in advance. So basically what that means is I'm going to do A, then I'm going to do B, and then I'm going to do C, and then I'm going to do D. So it doesn't feel like you have to wait so long to get to the ultimate goal. When it's smaller goals and you're able to implement them with intention, you can get to those and you feel more in control of what you're doing, and you're able to avoid more of those temptations. Second is more structural. It really involves taking control of your environment and putting temptations out of your visible field. And that sounds super easy, but it really does work. One of the things that I have found with my own work-related challenges is, trying to stay motivated when I'm doing a task that can be very repetitive and boring. If I need to work in a specific space, so I have my workspace, and then and it's very separate from, the place where the chocolate is hidden. And, if I have very specific goals that I want to engage in, I have to keep those temptations away from me. So, I have to leave my phone in the other room when I need to work. The phone has to go away because the temptation is to look at it and goof off for a while. I have to make sure that the really tantalizing food sources are not where I am, and then I can do what I need to do. So arranging your environment to avoid temptations matters. And also, if you know you're going to be in a situation where you need high self-control, make sure you've gotten some rest, because it is true that if you're trying to exert self-control, that takes emotional energy, it takes cognitive resources. So if you're super tired, it's harder to avoid those sorts of demands on yourself. You can also, really take a break from criticizing yourself. Understand that being able to exert self-control is, as your authors put it, a limited resource. You only have so much ability to be in executive control position. And there will be times when you're simply too tired for it. So understand that your ability to resist temptation is going to be limited. And demanding too much of yourself is really kind of setting yourself up for failure, so that you will break down and give in to your temptations, and then you'll be mad at yourself even more. So the idea is to be practical, break your tasks into sub-goals, arrange your environment carefully, and be rested enough when you know you're going to have to exert self-control. And that concludes my coverage of Learning Objective 5.3. Next time, we're going to move on and talk about how we present ourselves to others so that we can be seen the way we prefer to be seen.